Shortly after this, Constantine becomes the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. And really, when we look at Constantine, he has a huge impact on Christianity. But was Constantine a Christian? Now, some have claimed, yes, he was a Christian. Some have claimed he was a politician. He certainly, those that would claim he was a politician would look at him as maneuvering for political gain and not necessarily converting to a faith authentically. To add to the side that says he was a politician is the evidence of how Constantine's, let's call it, faith journey, right, not language that would have been used back then, was different from the experience of other Christians at the time. One of the first things to note is that he didn't become a catechumen. Constantine spent no time, like other converts, learning about the faith. And so there isn't that requirement that he spend years before becoming a Christian. Furthermore, he didn't place himself under the authority of any bishop or teacher. Right? So he doesn't kind of connect with a local church and say, I'm under the authority of this bishop, or I'm listening to what this church, I'm a part of this church. He considered himself to be a bishop of bishops. Right? And so there are expressions from Constantine's reign of seeing himself as over the bishops of the churches. And finally, he wasn't baptized until he was on his deathbed. So, certainly not the traditional route, even for the 4th century, of how a person identified themselves as Christian. But it appears also that he sincerely believed in the power of Christ. Now, he may have understood some of that, but the fact that he turned to Christian symbols as a way to gain the favor of the Christian God and the support of Jesus suggests that he does recognize the power of Jesus. Right? That Jesus wasn't just a dead Jewish carpenter. There's more to it than that for Constantine. On the other hand, when you look at Constantine's life, there are several places in his life where he holds on to some things from pagan religion. Apparently, he made some connections between the Christian God and Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. And so he, coins as late as 320, had the key rho on one side, the symbol of Christ, and on the other side, the symbol of the unconquered sun. S-U-N, not S-O-N. Right? I'm not talking about the unconquered Son of God, but the unconquered sun that hangs up in the sky. His father, Constantine Chlorus, was deified by the Romans after his death, as most emperors were, and it appears that Constantine accepted that. Which, how do you accept that your father's a god when you're supposed to be worshiping God the Father? He was recognized as the Pontifex Maximus of traditional Roman religion. The official religion during his time as emperor remains the traditional Roman religion. He even consulted the oracle of Apollo for guidance. On the other hand, right, he ordered the army to worship Sol Invictus on the first day of the week, or as we now refer to it, Sun Day. He donated the Lateran Palace, one of the imperial residences, to the church Bishops received guards, pagan temples were robbed, and proceeds given to churches. And so we have a lot of paganism on the one hand, but we also have some indications of, supporting Christianity on the other. In the 320s, the Arian controversy will arise. And we'll talk more about that when we get to doctrine. Well, Constantine takes it upon himself to intervene in a theological manner. Remember, he's not spent a lot of time learning about Christianity, fairly new as a Christian still, or at least identifying as a Christian. And he intervenes not so much looking for the right answer, but more because he wants there to be peace in his empire. One decision that will have an impact on the development of Christianity between Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire is the setting up of the city of Constantinople, the modern-day city of Istanbul. So it's today Istanbul, not Constantinople. And it becomes a rival to Rome, which further divides the Western Church and the Eastern Church as institutionalization takes place. Which church, many wondered, should be considered as authoritative? Should we look to the church at Rome for our authority, or should we look to the church at Constantinople? And so we have a very complex picture of Constantine. It's not a simple yes or no answer when we ask that, was he a Christian or not? A lot of it, of course, depends on how we define Christian. If we take as our defining moment baptism, right, and say, in order for him to be a Christian, he must be baptized, then Constantine, throughout his life, was not a Christian. If we're more charitable in our terminology of Christian, right, as broadly as we can conceive of it, it's still very difficult, right, because he's doing some things that are very pagan, that most Christians, even broadly conceived, would say, how can you worship or look upon your father as a god? That's kind of quite different. And in fact, Constantine himself was deified as a god upon his death by Romans. Questions about Constantine?
Wasn't his mother more a pretty big influence, especially on the churches? Because I read, I'm taking another class studying European history, and I read somewhere where she built she helped design a lot of the churches that there's some of them. I think some of them were rebuilt for what they were now, but overseas, and that she had a pretty big influence on the whole Christian aspect.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this when we get to the practice section. That Helena, Constantine's mother, goes to what we call the Holy Land on several pilgrimages, and wanting to find the tomb Jesus was laid in, where was the Garden of Gethsemane, and where was Jesus crucified, and those kind of things, and that has a profound effect on not only Constantine but others as well. One of the stories about that in his mother was that she was constantly looking for pieces from the cross. Right? She just wanted to find relics of pieces for the cross, and collected several supposed pieces of the cross that it was enough for 3 crosses. Right? So unlikely that she's discovering pieces of the true cross that Jesus, it was probably reused over and over again. The Romans, after they took Jesus off, probably put some other Jew on it. But yeah, that is part of the idea of tourism to the Holy Land is very influenced by her, and a lot of the places like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, some of the Church of the Nativity are all spots that are she kind of supposedly discovers, and then eventually churches are built and then rebuilt on those places. Any other questions, comments? We move on to talking about Constantine's successors. Constantine had three sons who shared rule for a while. Constantine II, Constantius, and Constans. They will not appear on a multiple choice question. They probably won't appear on an exam, right? Because those names, of course. What do you want to name this one? Well, you can Constantine already. Constantius, right? He's an early forerunner to George Foreman, the boxer who named all of his sons George Foreman. All of Constantine's sons are baptized. Right? So again, even though Constantine has this very interesting relationship with Christianity, he has all of his sons baptized. But they differ theologically. And so, like I said, they shared rule for a while, but some of them support the Arian version of Jesus, that Jesus was created and not eternal. Others are against Arius, because even though this is after the time of Arius a little bit, the Arian teaching is still floating around. And then out of that, they're trying to support their faction, right? So the Arians are trying to support Arian bishops and Christians. During the rule, some Christians are kind of emboldened to attack pagans and pagan temples, right? Because the emperors are Christian. But what we begin to see more often are emperors getting involved in ecclesiastical matters, and matters of the church. So if they don't particularly like a bishop, because of what the bishop is teaching, right? If they're an Arian emperor, and this is a bishop that believes that Jesus is eternal, they'll send them out, right? They'll exile them. They will use their power to enforce what they see as orthodoxy. And so if they're Arian, they think Arianism is orthodoxy. If they disagree with Arianism, then they think that that's orthodoxy, and they will use their political power to look for uniformity. But ultimately, there is a fear among these successors, and even among later successors, of the powers of the bishops and what the bishops represent. Ultimately, there are some attempts to arrest or even kill enemy bishops. Enemy in quotation marks, right? These are people within the Roman Empire who are Christian bishops, and you're trying to have them arrested as a Christian emperor. Eventually, the focus does become much more on getting rid of paganism. Constans and Constantius engage in kind of a mini war against paganism, but ultimately wasn't widespread. I forgot about the Arian influence here. I forgot I had that on the slide. And emperors getting involved in ecclesiastical matters. During their time, in order to counteract paganism, the emperors give privileges to the clergy. They're exempted from some taxes. And so bishops, for example, don't have to pay certain taxes. Animals of the clergy were not to be requisitioned. And so if you're a soldier going on and you see somebody and they have a horse or a donkey or whatever that you can use, as a soldier you could requisition them, right? I'm going to use that donkey. And no matter whether you wanted to give the donkey to the soldier or not. But clergy were not to have their animals requisitioned. After the time of the sons of Constantine, however, rule passes to a man named Julian. Julian was a relative of Constantine, grew up Christian, but eventually abandoned Christianity. Now, he had been spared when the rest of Constantine's relatives, except those three sons we talked about, had been killed. Right? He and his brother escaped. Eventually he goes to university, Roman University, becomes very interested in the ancient mystery religions of Rome and Greek and Roman philosophy. He has no desire to be in government office. Eventually, though, however, he is called into the service of the empire, eventually becoming emperor. So here he is, and he's referred to as Julian the Apostate because he has abandoned Christianity, and he's the last of the pagan emperors. When he becomes emperor, though, he tries to get rid of the Christian influence in Rome and tries to reestablish the ancient Roman religion. Now, he's trying to establish ancient Roman religion, but with a contemporary twist, because he begins to develop paganism like the Christian hierarchy is developing. Right? And so he's trying to make paganism look like, institutionally, Christianity. He reopens pagan temples, requires priests to observe a very strict morality. Right? Prior to this, pagan priests there really weren't strict moral guidelines. And he even tries to institute pagan charities. You know, looking at his society, he says, Jews take care of other Jews. Pagans don't take care of anybody. But the impious Galileans, which is what he called Christians, and he calls them Galileans, but the impious Galileans take care not only of their own, but ours as well. Right? So he sees how charitable Christians are and says, that's how they're winning converts, is they're taking care of their own people, but they're also taking care of people that aren't a part of Christianity. And so he tries to get pagan charities started, which never really works that well. He orders massive sacrifices to the gods. He never really decrees any sort of persecution, but he is interested in trying to impede the spread. So he restricts Christians in certain areas, tries to get converts from among scholars within Christianity, even creates a document called Against the Galileans, which is a ridicule of Christians. But supposedly, on his deathbed, with his inability to accomplish this return to paganism, Julian is said to have uttered, "O Galilean, you have conquered." Right? And so kind of it doesn't appear like he's repenting per se, but kind of recognizing here he is for the entirety of his adult life trying to stop Christianity, and he's just not been able to do it. There's nothing that he's been able to do that has stopped the spread of Christianity. Later emperors. There are some emperors who do try to practice what we might call non-interference. Largely trying to just keep the peace, keep everybody happy. But we also see quite a few emperors supporting the theology that they favor. Right? So Arian emperors support Arian bishops, and they persecute or exile Nicene bishops, Nicene being the more orthodox position. On the other hand, Nicene emperors support Nicene bishops, and so they exile or persecute Arian bishops. So the empire is still involved here in this issue. There are promises, there are threats, exile, torture. But we also begin to see that the emperors feel they need the support of the bishops and other ecclesiastical officials to legitimate the rule. That Christians will follow them if the bishops support them as emperor. And so the bishops get intertwined with the empire. They become religious advisors to the emperor. They become ambassadors to invading forces. On the other hand, just as the emperors are supporting those they theologically agree with, the opposite is coming true as well. The Nicene bishops try to block the activities of the Arian emperors, and the Arian emperors, or the Arian bishops, try to block the activities of the Nicene bishops. And so what we see now for the first time in Christian history is that church and state are very closely intertwined. Right? Before this time period, it had been the church was separate from the empire. And the church was on marginalization. Yes, sometimes in the 3rd century, Christians were in positions of governmental influence, but they did not have that connection, and certainly the emperors weren't looking to Christian leaders for guidance. Right? That wasn't a part of what they thought about. But as we work through the 4th century, we are seeing paganism end in Rome, at least officially. The Emperor Gratian orders that there is to be no more financial support of paganism and its priests. Right, so prior to this time, pagan priests, pagan temples had been receiving money from the empire. Gratian ends that. In the year 379, Theodosius becomes emperor. He will be the last sole ruler of the Roman Empire. On his death, he had it split between his sons. One son ruled the west, one son ruled the east. In the year 380, he issues an order that says and this is quote, all the people under his rule are to follow the form of religion handed down by the Apostle Peter to the Romans. Now, he does have some policies that protect pagan worship in 380. He eventually will forbid paganism altogether. He is a Nicene emperor. Right? He's opposed to the Arian theology. And will also call for the Council of Constantinople to attempt to finish the Arian and Nicene division, which shows the challenge of being emperor and Christian. Here you are as emperor, and you are a Christian, and within your empire there is what you perceive to be a heresy, Arian, teaching things that are false teachings about Jesus. What do you do about it? Do you let it go? Do you arrest people? Do you throw them in prison? Is that the way to be a Christian emperor? How far do you go if people won't recant their heresy? Well, Theodosius felt that some of these heretics deserved death and sentenced them to it. But there were other challenges that Theodosius had, and some of which brought him into conflict with a very prominent bishop of the time, a man named Ambrose, who was bishop of Milan. Two examples of this. Christians burned down a Jewish synagogue. And so Theodosius punishes them and orders them to rebuild it. Now, I would say probably most of us would say, that's probably the right decision here. I mean, even though Judaism, has rejected Jesus, you can't go around destroying people's property. Ambrose, however, is upset by Theodosius' decree that they should be rebuilding this synagogue, arguing Christians shouldn't be forced to support other religions. Ultimately, Theodosius retracts. And another time, there's a riot in Thessalonica, and an imperial official is killed. At first, Theodosius forgives that official, or forgives the killers of that official, I should say. But he actually tricks the suspects and slaughters 7,000 of them. Ambrose bars him from the church until he's willing to publicly repent, ultimately leading Theodosius to develop a law where if somebody was sentenced to death, there was a delay of 30 days before it was carried out. That would give the emperor the time to talk with his advisors, not make any hasty decisions. We'll pick up on Thursday, Lord willing, with a discussion of the culture and society. Right? There's political changes going on. That's going to impact how Christians are looking at their relationship to the world around them.